The sun cast long shadows over the dusty main street of Downieville, California, when Winifred Kane limped into town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a past she couldn't outrun. The year was 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War, and like the nation itself, Winifred bore scars, both visible and hidden remnants of a fire that had claimed her family's homestead and left her marked for life. "You'll never find a husband looking like that," her aunt had told her before sending her west with a one-way train ticket and an address of a distant cousin who'd settled in the Sierra Nevada foothills during the gold rush. "No man wants damaged goods." The words had cut deeper than the flames ever could. Downieville wasn't what she'd expected. Once a booming mining settlement, it had settled into a quiet existence after the gold fever subsided. Still, it maintained a certain frontier charm with its wooden boardwalks and buildings that clung to the hillsides along the confluence of the Downey and North Yuba rivers. Winifred adjusted her shawl to better cover the scarring that ran from her right temple down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. "Excuse me." She approached an elderly man sweeping the boardwalk in front of what appeared to be a general store. "Could you direct me to the residence of Martha Wilcox?" The old man leaned on his broom, studying her with rheumy eyes. "Martha's been gone these 2 years now, miss. Consumption took her." Winifred felt her heart sink. Martha had been her last hope, her only connection in this strange place. "I see. Thank you for telling me." "You're welcome to step inside," the man offered, gesturing to the store. "My daughter runs the place now. She might know of some work for a young woman." With nowhere else to turn, Winifred followed him into Downieville General Store. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and a plump woman with kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Pa, who's this you've brought in?" Says she was looking for Martha Wilcox. "Thought you might help her find some work." The woman wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "I'm Betsy Miller, and you are Winifred Kane. I've come from Philadelphia. Martha was my cousin." Recognition dawned on Betsy's face. "Oh, you poor dear. Martha mentioned a relative back east might come someday." Her eyes flickered briefly to the visible scarring on Winifred's face before returning to meet her gaze. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" "No, madam. I've just arrived." Betsy nodded decisively. "Well, we can't have you sleeping on the street. There's a room above the store. It's small, but it's yours until you get settled." "That's very kind, but I couldn't." "Nonsense. Martha was a good friend. Besides, I could use help in the store. My arthritis makes it hard to reach the high shelves these days." And just like that, Winifred found herself with both lodging and employment. The room was indeed small, but it was clean and private, a luxury she hadn't expected to find so quickly. That evening, after Betsy had shown her the basics of the store, Winifred stood at the small window of her new room, watching the lamplights of Downieville flicker to life. She carefully removed her high-collared dress, wincing as the fabric caught on the ridged skin of her shoulder. The mirror on the wall reflected what she tried so hard to hide: burned scars that covered much of her right side, from her face down to her hip, creating a landscape of pink and white tissue that told the story of that terrible night. "No man wants damaged goods," she whispered to herself, repeating her aunt's cruel assessment. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned away from the mirror. She hadn't come west for a husband. She'd come for a fresh start. Life in Downieville settled into a rhythm. Winifred proved herself a quick learner and a hard worker. Most customers were kind enough, though she caught their curious glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Children were less discreet, openly staring until their parents hushed them. Winifred developed a habit of keeping to her side of the counter, arranging her hair to cover as much of her face as possible. It was nearly a month after her arrival when Isaac Cooper rode into town. He came with the spring cattle drive, one of several cowboys moving a herd north from Sacramento. While the others headed straight for the saloon, Isaac made his way to the general store, a list of supplies in his weathered hand. The bell rang as he entered, and Winifred looked up from the ledger she was updating. He was tall, with broad shoulders narrowed to a lean waist. His face, tanned from long days under the sun, was partially hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. When he removed it, she saw eyes the color of a summer sky. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. "Need to pick up some things for the trail." Winifred nodded, careful to keep the scarred side of her face angled away. "Of course. What do you need?" He handed over the list, their fingers brushing momentarily. His were calloused but surprisingly gentle. As she moved about the store, gathering the requested items, she felt his eyes following her. Not the usual stares of pity or morbid curiosity, something else she couldn't quite place. "You're new here," he observed as she placed the last item on the counter. "Yes, about a month now." "Name's Isaac Cooper. I drive cattle between ranches most of the year." "Winifred Kane," she replied, keeping her eyes on the merchandise as she tallied the cost. "That'll be $3.45. He counted out the money, then hesitated before taking his purchases. "Miss Kane, would it be too forward to ask if you might join me for supper this evening? There's a decent eating house down the street." Winifred froze, certain she'd misheard. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with those clear blue eyes, waiting patiently for her answer. I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Cooper." She gestured vaguely to her face. "I'm not one for social outings." Something in his expression shifted, not pity but a quiet understanding. "The offer stands if you change your mind. I'll be in town until tomorrow." After he left, Betsy emerged from the back room. "That was Isaac Cooper," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "He comes through a few times a year, one of the most respected drovers in these parts." "He asked me to supper," Winifred said, still bewildered. Betsy's eyes widened. "And?" "What did you say?" "I declined, of course." "But why? He's a good man from what folks say, honest and hardworking." Winifred touched her scarred cheek self-consciously. "You know why, Mrs. Miller, men like that don't court women like me." Betsy's expression softened. "Don't be so quick to decide what others think, dear. Not everyone sees with the same eyes." That night, Winifred lay awake, thinking about Isaac Cooper and his unexpected invitation. Part of her wondered what might have happened if she'd said yes. Would he have recoiled once he got a better look at her scars in the light of the dining room? Or would he have been polite throughout the meal, only to make a hasty retreat afterward? Either scenario seemed equally humiliating. The next morning, she was surprised to find him back at the store, examining a display of knives near the front window. "Mr. Cooper," she acknowledged with a nod. "Forget something yesterday," he turned, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "As a matter of fact, I did. I forgot to convince you that having supper with me wouldn't be the end of the world." Despite herself, Winifred felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Cooper, Isaac, please." "Mr. Cooper," she repeated firmly. "I appreciate your persistence, but my answer remains the same." He studied her for a moment. "May I ask why?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "I should think it obvious," she said finally, gesturing to her face. "Your scars." He shook his head slightly. "Miss Kane, I've been on my own since I was 15. I've broken every bone in my body at least once. Got thrown from horses, trampled by cattle, caught in a wildfire that nearly claimed half the men I was riding with." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a patchwork of burned scars not unlike her own. "We all carry marks of one kind or another." Winifred stared at his arm, then back to his face. For the first time, she noticed the faint lines on his neck that disappeared beneath his collar. "The fire," she found herself asking. "How did you survive it?" "Wrapped myself in a wet blanket and ran through the flames," he said simply. "Lost 3 good friends that day. Figure I'm living on borrowed time as it is." He rolled his sleeve back down. "So you see, Miss Kane, your scars don't frighten me. If anything, they tell me you're a survivor, same as me." Before she could respond, the bell above the door rang as several customers entered. Isaac stepped back with a slight bow. "Think on it. I'll be at the eating house at 6. Throughout the day, Winifred found her thoughts returning to their conversation. By closing time, she'd made up her mind. She couldn't go. What did she know about this man, really? And yet, as she climbed the stairs to her room, she found herself reaching for her one good dress. At precisely 6 o'clock, Winifred pushed open the door to Mabel's eating house. It was busier than she'd expected, filled with miners and townspeople enjoying their evening meal. For a moment, she considered turning around, but then she spotted him at a corner table, his face lighting up as their eyes met. "You came," he said as she approached, standing to pull out her chair. "I surprised myself," she admitted, taking her seat. Conversation flowed more easily than she'd anticipated. Isaac told her about his life on the trail, about the ranches he'd worked and the places he'd seen. In turn, she shared small pieces of her own story, her childhood in Philadelphia, her love of books, her dream of someday having a place of her own. "What happened?" he asked finally, his voice gentle. "The fire, if you don't mind my asking." Winifred set down her fork, the memories she'd tried so hard to suppress flooding back. "It was 3 years ago. My parents' farm outside Philadelphia. I woke to the smell of smoke. By the time I realized what was happening, the entire lower floor was engulfed." She paused, her throat tight. "My father had gone back in for my mother. Neither of them made it out." Isaac's hand moved across the table to cover hers. "I'm sorry. The neighbors found me in the yard. I don't remember much after that. Just pain, and then waking in a hospital weeks later." She looked down at their joined hands. "My aunt took me in, but it was clear I was a burden. When she heard Martha had settled out west, she saw her chance to be rid of me. Her loss," Isaac said firmly, "and Downieville's gain." After supper, he walked her back to the store. At the foot of the stairs that led to her room, he stopped. "I'm leaving with the herd tomorrow," he said. "Heading up to Oregon, should be back through in about 2 months." Winifred nodded, fighting an unexpected sense of disappointment. "Safe travels, then. May I write to you?" The question hung in the air between them. "I'm not much for fancy words, but I'd like to keep in touch." "Yes," she found herself saying. "I'd like that." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good night, Winifred Kane. I'm mighty glad you decided to join me for supper." As promised, Isaac's first letter arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by a cattle driver passing through Downieville. His handwriting was neat but clearly unpracticed, the letters sometimes slanting in different directions. He wrote about the trail, the weather, a calf he'd helped deliver during a thunderstorm. He asked about the store, about whether she'd found time to read the book they'd discussed at supper. Winifred read the letter multiple times before carefully composing her reply. She told him about a new shipment of fabrics that had arrived, about how she'd started teaching the blacksmith's daughter to read in the evenings, about the wild violets blooming along the riverbank. Their correspondence continued through spring and into early summer. With each exchange, Winifred felt herself opening up a little more, sharing thoughts and dreams she'd kept guarded for so long. And in his letters, Isaac revealed himself to be a thoughtful, observant man with a quiet humor that often made her laugh out loud. "You seem different lately," Betsy remarked one afternoon as they restocked shelves. Happier, Winifred smiled. I suppose I am. It wouldn't have anything to do with those letters from a certain cowboy, would it? Perhaps, she admitted, feeling a blush creep up her neck. He's a good man, that Isaac Cooper. You deserve some happiness, dear. It was late June when Isaac returned to Downieville. Winifred was sweeping the boardwalk when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw him riding at the head of a small group of cowboys, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Her heart skipped a beat as he spotted her and tipped his hat. That evening they walked along the river, the summer air warm around them. Isaac told her about his journey, about the ranch in Oregon where he delivered the cattle, about his plans for the future. I've been saving, he explained as they sat on a fallen log watching the water rush by. Got a piece of land picked out not far from here. Good grazing, plenty of water. Been working other men's cattle for too long, time I had some of my own. That sounds wonderful, Winifred said sincerely. Your own ranch. It needs a lot of work, he admitted. The cabin's hardly more than 4 walls and a roof, but I figure I can fix it up, make it a real home. The word home hung in the air between them, filled with possibilities neither had yet dared to voice. Winifred, Isaac said finally, turning to face her fully. These past months writing to you, thinking about you, it's been the best time of my life. I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've been waiting for you without even knowing it. She looked down at her hands, overwhelmed by his words and the emotion behind them. Isaac, I care for you too, more than I thought possible, but you should know what you're getting into. She gestured to her scars. This isn't just my face. They go everywhere. I'm not whole. Isaac reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements as he gently turned her face toward him. Then, with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, he traced the line of scarring from her temple down her cheek to where it disappeared beneath her collar. You are whole, he said softly. These are part of you, part of your story. They're beautiful to me because they're yours. Winifred closed her eyes, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. No one had ever touched her scars like that, not with disgust or clinical detachment, but with reverence. I love you, Winifred Kane, Isaac said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Every part of you. They told me no man would want a woman with scars, she whispered. He smiled, his fingertips still resting gently against her marked skin. They were wrong. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, a kiss as gentle as it was profound, and Winifred felt something long dormant within her begin to bloom. Isaac stayed in Downieville for 2 weeks that summer, the longest he'd ever remained in one place during his years as a drover. Each day, he'd stop by the store to help with deliveries or repairs, and in the evenings they'd walk together through town or along the river, talking about everything and nothing. It was during one such evening walk that Isaac proposed. They were sitting on their log by the river, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson when he took her hand in his. I've been thinking, he began, uncharacteristically nervous, about the future, about us. Winifred turned to him, her heart racing. What about us? I want there to be in us, Winnie. Not just letters and visits when I'm passing through. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for the right woman. Opening the box, he revealed a simple gold band set with a small pearl. I know it's not fancy, it's perfect, Winifred breathed. Winifred Kane, will you marry me? Come live with me on that piece of land I told you about. It won't be easy at first, but I promise to work hard every day to make you happy. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, yes, I will. The joy on his face was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They were married 2 days later in Downieville's small church, with Betsy Miller and the town's minister as witnesses. Winifred wore a new dress of pale blue calico that Betsy had helped her make, and Isaac had purchased a new shirt for the occasion. It was a simple ceremony, but as they exchanged vows, Winifred felt a sense of rightness that transcended any grand wedding she might have imagined in her younger days. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Cooper," Isaac whispered as they left the church to the cheers and well wishes of those townspeople who had gathered outside. "Mrs. Cooper," she repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. "I like that." They spent their wedding night in a room at Downieville's small hotel, a luxury Isaac had insisted upon despite Winifred's protests that they could stay in her room above the store. "My wife deserves better than a narrow cot for her wedding night," he'd said firmly. In the privacy of their room, Winifred faced her greatest fear, revealing the full extent of her scarring to her husband. As she slowly removed her dress, she kept her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to watch his reaction. "Winnie," Isaac said softly, lifting her chin so she had to meet his gaze. "You don't have to hide from me, ever." Then, with the same tenderness he'd shown by the river, he traced the network of scars that covered her right shoulder, arm, and side. "You're beautiful," he murmured, "so beautiful it takes my breath away." And for the first time since the fire, Winifred didn't feel damaged or broken. In Isaac's eyes and touch, she found not pity but admiration, not disgust but desire. That night, she discovered what it meant to be truly loved body and soul. The following morning, they packed their few belongings and set out for Isaac's land, located in a valley about 20 miles east of Downieville. The journey took most of the day, their pace slowed by the wagon loaded with supplies they'd purchased for their new home. As they crested a ridge in the late afternoon, Isaac drew the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said, pointing to a small clearing in the distance. "It's not much yet, but it's perfect," Winifred said, squeezing his hand. And though the cabin was indeed little more than 4 walls and a roof, as Isaac had described, she meant it. This would be their home. The first weeks were hard work. They repaired the roof, patched holes in the walls, and built simple furniture from lumber Isaac hauled from town. Winifred planted a vegetable garden, using seeds Betsy had given her as a wedding gift. Isaac constructed a corral and small barn, in preparation for the cattle he planned to purchase once they were properly settled. Each night, exhausted but satisfied with their progress, they'd sit on the porch Isaac had added to the front of the cabin, watching the stars emerge above the valley. In those quiet moments, Winifred felt a contentment she'd never thought possible after losing her family. No regrets. Isaac asked one evening, his arm around her shoulders. She shook her head. "None. You," he kissed her temple, right where her scarring began. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." By autumn, the ranch, which they'd named Cooper's Creek after the small stream that ran through their property, had begun to take shape. Isaac had purchased 20 head of cattle and 2 good breeding bulls, the beginning of what he hoped would eventually be a substantial herd. Winifred had preserved food from their garden for the winter, and had started making curtains for the windows from fabric she'd brought from the store. Their nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, lived about 5 miles away and had proven to be good friends. Martha Johnson had been particularly kind, sharing recipes and advice on maintaining a household so far from town. It was Martha who first noticed, during one of her visits, what Winifred had begun to suspect herself. "When are you due?" she asked casually as they hung laundry on the line. Winifred nearly dropped the shirt she was holding. "What?" Martha smiled knowingly. "The baby. I'd guess early spring from the look of you." I'm not sure," Winifred admitted, one hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "I've suspected for a few weeks now, but I haven't told Isaac yet. I wanted to be certain. Take it from a mother of 5 you're carrying, and from the glow about you, I'd say you're at least 3 months along." That night, after they'd finished supper and were sitting by the fire, Winifred gathered her courage. "Isaac, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "What is it, love?" "I'm going to have a baby, our baby. In the spring." The bridle fell to the floor as Isaac crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Winnie. You're happy then." Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, a little piece of you and me." As winter settled over the valley, Winifred's condition became more apparent. Isaac insisted she rest more, taking on extra chores despite her protests. He made frequent trips to town for supplies, returning with not just necessities, but small gifts: a soft blanket for the baby, a rocking chair for Winifred, books to read during the long winter evenings. In February, a blizzard swept through the region, isolating Cooper's Creek for nearly 2 weeks. Winifred, now visibly pregnant, found herself confined to the cabin as snowdrifts piled higher than the windows. Isaac ventured out only to tend to the livestock, returning with frost in his beard and a chill that took hours by the fire to dispel. "I'm worried about when the baby comes," Winifred confessed one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "We're so far from town, from a doctor." Isaac pulled her closer. "Martha Johnson delivered all 5 of her children without a doctor, and she's promised to help when your time comes, and I'll be right here, no matter what." "What if?" She hesitated, a fear she'd carried silently throughout her pregnancy finally finding voice. "What if the baby has my scars?" "Then we'll love them all the more," Isaac said firmly. "But Winnie, your scars came from the fire. They're not something our child will inherit." "I know that in my head," she sighed. "My heart just worries. That's what parents do, I reckon. Worry." He placed a protective hand over her rounded belly. "But this little one is already so loved. That's what matters." Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing new life to the valley. By April, the creek was running high with snowmelt. Wildflowers dotted the pastures, and Winifred felt like she might burst at any moment. Her labor began on a clear morning as she was hanging out the wash. The first pains were mild enough that she finished her task before telling Isaac, who had been mending a fence near the barn. "It's time," she said simply when he came in for the midday meal. His eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and panic. "I'll go for Martha," he said, already reaching for his hat. "There's no rush," Winifred assured him. "First babies take their time, according to Martha, but yes, it would be good to have her here." Isaac rode out immediately, returning 2 hours later with Martha Johnson, who took charge with calm efficiency born of experience. "You men wait outside," she instructed, shooing Isaac and her husband Tom from the cabin. "This is women's work now." The labor was long and difficult. As the day turned to evening and then to night, Winifred's pains grew stronger and closer together. Martha was a steady presence, offering encouragement and practical help in equal measure. "You're doing beautifully," she assured Winifred during a particularly hard contraction. "Your body knows what to do, trust it." Outside, Isaac paced the porch, flinching at each cry that escaped from within. Tom Johnson sat on the steps, smoking his pipe and offering occasional words of reassurance. "Childbirth ain't pretty," he said gruffly, "but Martha knows her business. Your wife is in good hands." Just before dawn, when the eastern sky had begun to lighten with the promise of a new day, A different cry split the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking their first breath. Isaac was through the door before anyone could stop him, finding Winifred propped up in their bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Isaac," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "come meet your son." He approached the bed on unsteady legs, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and child. Martha discreetly slipped from the room, giving the new family their privacy. "A boy," Isaac murmured, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. "We have a son." Winifred adjusted the blanket to reveal a tiny, red face topped with a shock of dark hair. "He looks like you," she said with a tired smile. Isaac touched the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I've never seen anything so beautiful in my life." "Would you like to hold him?" With reverent care, Isaac gathered his son into his arms, marveling at how small and yet complete he was. "What shall we call him?" "I was thinking of William," Winifred suggested, "after my father." "William Cooper," Isaac tested the name. "A good, strong name." "I like it." As the sun rose over Cooper's Creek, bathing the small cabin in golden light, the new family shared a moment of perfect contentment. William dozed in his father's arms while Winifred rested against the pillows, watching her husband and son with a heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain so much love. "Thank you," Isaac said, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me this. A family of my own." Winifred reached out to touch his face, tracing the faint scar that ran along his jawline, a mirror to her own markings. "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently, "and I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought us here." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Coopers. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet determination. When he was 3, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, named for Isaac's mother. Cooper's Creek prospered under Isaac's careful management. The original 20 head of cattle had grown to over 100, and they'd added sheep and chickens to the farm. Winifred's garden expanded each year, producing enough vegetables not just for their own table, but to trade in Downieville for goods they couldn't produce themselves. They built an addition to the cabin as their family grew, adding 2 small bedrooms and expanding the main living area. Isaac constructed a proper dining table to replace the makeshift one they'd used those first years, large enough to accommodate their family and occasional guests. When William was 7 and Elizabeth 4, Winifred discovered she was expecting their 3rd child. The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because she now had the confidence of experience. "You want a boy or a girl this time?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children chase fireflies in the summer twilight. Winifred leaned against his shoulder. "I don't mind either way as long as they're healthy. What about you?" "Same," he said, his arm tightening around her. "Though I wouldn't mind another daughter with your spirit," she laughed. "Be careful what you wish for. Elizabeth already has you wrapped around her little finger." It was true. Their daughter had only to look at her father with her big brown eyes, so like Winifred's own, and he would give her anything she wanted. William, more serious and thoughtful, was equally loved but less demonstrative in his affections. The children had asked about their mother's scars, of course. When William was 5, he traced them with his small fingers just as Isaac had done that day by the river. "Does it hurt, Mama?" he'd asked, his face solemn. "Not anymore, sweetheart," she'd assured him. "They're just marks from a long time ago." "Papa has them too," Elizabeth had observed. "On his arms." "That's right," Winifred had confirmed. "Everyone has scars, some you can see and some you can't. They show where we've been hurt, but also that we were strong enough to heal." That explanation had satisfied the children, who accepted their parents' marked bodies as simply part of who they were. In December, as the first snow of winter dusted Cooper's Creek, Winifred gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Sarah. The double blessing brought joy to the entire household, though Winifred found herself exhausted by the demands of two infants. "I don't know how I would manage without you," she told Isaac one night, after he'd gotten up twice to bring her first one crying baby, then the other. "You'd manage," he said with confidence. "You're the strongest person I know, but you don't have to do it alone, not ever again." As the twins grew from infants to toddlers, the ranch continued to thrive. Isaac hired 2 young cowboys to help with the expanding herd, building a bunkhouse near the barn to accommodate them. Winifred began making cheese from their cow's milk, developing a recipe that became sought after in Downieville and even as far away as Sacramento. When William turned 10, Isaac started teaching him the business of ranching in earnest. The boy took to it naturally, showing his father's affinity for animals and instinctive understanding of the land. Elizabeth, meanwhile, revealed a talent for numbers, keeping track of the family's accounts with a precision that amazed her parents. By 12, she was handling most of the ranch's bookkeeping, freeing Winifred to focus on the household and the twins, who were as active and curious as their older siblings had been. Life wasn't without its hardships. A drought one summer nearly devastated their cattle. A particularly harsh winter claimed several of their sheep. And there was the terrible spring when 7-year-old James fell into the creek during the snowmelt and nearly drowned, saved only by William's quick thinking and Elizabeth's sprint to fetch their father. Through it all, the bond between Isaac and Winifred remained unshakable. 20 years after their wedding in Downieville's small church, they still sat together on the porch each evening, watching the sunset and sharing the day's events. "Did you ever imagine this?" Winifred asked one such evening, gesturing to the prosperous ranch around them. "That day we met in the store," Isaac smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I knew I wanted a future with you in it. The rest, the ranch, the children, those were dreams I hardly dared to voice." "They told me no man would want a woman with scars," Winifred mused, echoing words she'd spoken long ago by the river. "I believed them for so long." Isaac reached over to trace the familiar pattern on her cheek, a gesture that had become a symbol of their love over the years. The scars had faded somewhat with time, silvering with age, but they were as much a part of her as her brown eyes or the streak of gray that had appeared in her dark hair. "I'm grateful every day that you proved them wrong," he said. "That you took a chance on a dusty cowboy passing through town." Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, William discussing the next day's work with the hired hands, Elizabeth calculating the profits from their latest cattle sale, the twins arguing over whose turn it was to feed the chickens in the morning. "Our legacy," Winifred said softly. "Whatever happens to us, this what we've built together will continue." "It will," Isaac agreed, "but we've got plenty of years ahead of us yet. I'm not done making memories with you, Winnie Cooper." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, hand in hand, their marked skin touching a testament to all they had endured and all they had built from the ashes of their separate pasts. The scars that had once seemed to define Winifred's future had instead become just one thread in the rich tapestry of a life filled with love, family, and purpose. And as stars began to appear above Cooper's Creek, Winifred offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the fire that had nearly destroyed her, for the journey west that had seemed like exile, for the general store in Downieville, and most of all, for the cowboy who had looked at her scars and seen not damage but beauty, not weakness but strength. They had built something extraordinary together, something that would outlast them both. And it had all begun with a touch, a smile, and the courage to believe that love could see beyond the surface to the heart beneath.